Thank you. And John's been very strict. I'd normally put up slides, show you graphs. You're getting none of that. And just 15 minutes. So halfway through this, I'm just going to stop. What should I tell you? I'm a Labour Party member. I grew up in Oxford. I'm in Marston Ward. It's good timing to do 100 days of Starmer's government now, because you wouldn't believe how many people have written 100 days of Labour articles. So I've read them, and they're interesting. I thought I'd try to do an across-the-board thing, which I'll fail at, but I was going to start off on the far right and talk about how terrible these 100 days have been compared to if Sunak had simply stayed in power. And we just had to give them a little bit longer, or even Truss, and so on. That's as good as I can do for. But it's a fascinating time because you have a Tory party in utter disarray, really. And we don't know if the mic's working.
Are you wearing it?
I am wearing it. Do we need to turn it on, though? Maybe that'll be it. Let's have a look.
Can you hear me at the back? Yeah. Right.
Where do I turn it on?
Can you hear Danny?
There we go. How about that? Is that any better? Yes?
Yes.
Wave if you can hear.
Yeah, good.
Right. If you're not waving at the back, you've just discovered something about, oh, well done, you're hearing.
Right.
I can stand up. Happier? Okay. There's been quite a few that have done positive things, including Labour itself issue some things. Let's go through that quickly because I'm down to 13 minutes now. Okay. One tweet got 1.1 million views about everything that's Labour done, which is to introduce 17 bills and enact 2 of them. I'm going to completely ignore the clothes, the seats at Arsenal, the £4 million donation from the arms company, all of that. You know that. I'm going to go for what have they actually done. So the big one is the Employment Rights Bill, but we're still waiting for the details on that. The next one is the Water Special Measures Bill to allow you to do criminal liability for Thames water bosses, but we're still waiting for the details on that. But it's coming. The Great British Energy Bill, not yet enacted, much smaller than Ed wanted, but it's still there. Terrorism Protection of Premises Bill for large venues. Renters' Rights Bill, which is very good. Not yet get the details, possibly being slightly watered down, because a lot of MPs are landlords. But so much better than what has happened since 2010. Labour have been promising better rights for renters for some time. Then you start, well, maybe this will annoy somebody, and we are in a church. The Lord Spiritual Women Act, to ensure that the bishops entering the House of Lords must be female where possible. Now, you may think this is revolutionary, but there's a lot of what they've done in their first 100 days, which is very odd. I partly wonder if there's somebody sitting there going, nobody's going to remember what we did in our first 100 days, so let's just put through the stuff that's, it's only us in Iran who have clerics in our legislature. And to worry about making it slightly not as bad as it is by having some women bishops is not revolutionary. And this is my damning side of what's going on. A lot of the things that are going on are slightly wheeling the oils of capitalism better and not being quite as nasty as the last lot, which was hardly difficult because the last lot were the most far-right party in the whole world as analysed by the Financial Times. So it's not easy, it's not hard to be better than Tories. So let's go through. Number 5, bank resolution recapitalisation bills to give the Bank of England more power over small banks if they fail. Again, oiling the wheels of capitalism. Passenger Service Railway Bill, that's good. We're going to eventually work out these things don't work if you privatise them. We've done a service for the world by privatising everything. Then we have people come to this country and we say, oh yes, you get on the train. But do allow, 3 hours extra. The Crown Estate Bill, over its powers to invest for the Crown, to unlock significant investment. Parliamentary Association Bill about the powers of the Red Cross and so on and their status. You probably never heard of these things, right? But digital assets bill so that cryptocurrency can be treated as normal. Why would you do that? Perhaps some cryptocurrency person has been having a word with Rachel. I certainly know the house builders have, because for years and years I studied housing. What happens is you go to party conferences and the house builders pay for a nice meal. They have the housing minister there. You as the academic on the far end of the table. And before you know it, Barrett's has got a new bit of legislation in. And if you remember the first 10 days, it was all about the house builders and building lots of houses. Arbitration law, Institute of Apprentice, like transferring how you can do apprenticeships, protection and regulations of meteorology bill. And here's one they've done. It's actually been implemented. The Supply and Appropriation Main Estates Act, procedures to sign off departmental spending until next March. I'll get to the next one. House of Lords Registry, we're going to do something about the House of Lords, but again, no details properly as yet. I'm going to stop there on that particular list. It's like housekeeping. It's like what was still on our agenda before. It's odd. Labour's achievements so far from the Labour Party itself. My party, I'm a member, remember. And it is, they really should learn not to put it on red background. Red background doesn't work. It's the way your cones work in your eyes, right? We're going to set up a national wealth fund. We've been the Rwanda plan, but we're going to open up Campsfield again. Okay, doesn't say that there. And it carries on. Okay, the left of Labour one. If you want to look it up, Mike Phipps, I think, has done the best left Labour summary on LabourHub. LabourHub, you can Google. LabourHub is Mike Phipps. If you want, this is wonderful. Well, if you ever feel like you can't do anything, you can actually set up your own website, make it look as if there are hundreds of contributors, and have an effect. I like Mike Phipps very much. His main point, and I won't go into the 12 pages I've printed out, is that Starmer's managed to fall by 45 points in terms of popularity in an unprecedented rate, and Labour's losing all the local election seats they're going. I've put that away to stop myself going through it. So what's going on? It could have been worse. It always is bad when you get a new government. If you remember the Blair government in 1997, the first thing that they did is keep their promise to enact Conservative spending plans for 2 years, and they did it. This lot aren't going to do something as bad as that. This is better than New Labour, because they're not going to stick to Conservative spending plans. Partly because they can't literally watch it all come crumbling down. Which is why a set of ministers today publicly wrote, I think, to Rachel Reeves saying you can't do what you want to do. And what she wants to do, if you remember, is 40 billion extra to be spent. And they say that's not enough. So we're already getting the rows inside the group. They're in a bind. They did talk over the summer, which in effect was the opposite of Ream in 1997. It was Starmer saying things can only get worse, news management. We then get the worst race riots in Europe for years, far worse than the small ones in Sweden. It could have been worse. They may not have been stopped in the number of weeks they were stopped. The Prime Minister and I think the Chancellor both cancelled their holidays to cope with this. It could have been worse. They could have gone on holiday. You know, that's what the last set of ministers used to do. You know, at least they cancelled their holidays and they hung around. My summary in 2 minutes is that what's occurred within the Labour Party is this desperate attempt to keep a big tent that was getting wider and wider and bigger and bigger and bigger, as Tony Blair and Gordon Brown took the party far to the right of normal Conservatives. If you don't believe me about Gordon Brown, he's just written the book with his hedge fund friends, which I've reviewed. Meanwhile, you have some old-fashioned social democrats, not very radical ones, still left in the party, Diane Abbott. From a European point of view, these people are pretty mild-mannered. Party gets really, really wide. The country is fractured. We then go through an enormous series of purges, which has happened in the party. You get rid of the people with soul. You might also get rid of some people who are troublemakers, but you basically get rid of the people who might say you have to pay child benefit for the third child. And why? They've been chucked out. You're then left with a core group of people who enter government. You parachute some of your friends in at the very last minute to Swansea or Durham, including our nice friend Torsten, who's the person who produced the statistic that says that 56% of children with a brother and sister are going hungry several times a month. I can't wait. I like Torsten. I think it's brilliant that he'll go to Swansea every Friday because you can learn a lot from data. We have an enormous number of Labour MPs, far more than can ever be junior ministers. They represent every single poor constituency in the country without exception. These are now the poorest constituencies in all of Europe, poorer than most of Eastern Europe, where children are getting shorter and people are going hungry, and they can't become junior ministers. You don't have an internal purge and that kind of hatred that you saw in Labour and it suddenly stop. Right? If that's your mode of operation, it carries on. It'll carry on. That infighting will carry on because it's a fractured situation. It's a country in desperate straits. You don't necessarily see it in Oxford that easily, but go to a lot of parts of the north or poor parts of the south, and it can be shocking. Or visit mainland Europe and come back, and then you suddenly realise when you visit mainland Europe, oh, that's what 2% improvement a year means, because we're still in 2008. Well, the bad news is it's not quite as good as 2008 was. You can go back to the Wilson government and the arguments then, which were ferocious in 64, 65, 66, about what they were doing. You know, in hindsight, we can look back with rose-tinted glasses and go circular 10, comprehensive schools wasn't incredible, you know, but in a way that this isn't new. The 45 government, Labour doesn't have that many, so it's quite easy. The 45 government was kind of shock and awe, but that was a coalition across parties. It wasn't just Labour. Labour's created a myth about what it did in 45. It just had to happen. So my gut feeling about the first 100 days is they could have been worse. They could have been much worse, given those riots. We could have had hostels being burnt down and we could have bodies now. Starmer has done some unusual things that weren't predicted. In particular, if you're a nerd about this, appointing an Attorney General who wasn't expected to be appointed, who, to quote, is in some ways pro-Palestinian, who has, it is said, changed the rules so that at least 10% of the weapons we're sending to Israel we no longer send. Partly because people don't want to end up in The Hague in their 70s. But that's a big shift within Labour. Right? And that, so there are changes. If you're really cynical and you say nothing changes, that, I think, was unpredictable. The last thing I'll say, and what really shocked them, and they didn't expect, us, my party, and that's how fractured we are, you know. I say them, I'm in this party, got fewer votes than in 2019. That's an utter shock. If your big mantra is, you have to be practical and sensible, otherwise you'll never win an election, and fewer people vote for you than vote for a party led by a man utterly demonised, what's going on? Now, Nice Ed Davey got fewer votes, and that shocked me because, you know, you just suddenly discover the man's got a life, he's really interesting. He goes on roller coasters, but about his family. The Liberals did a brilliant election campaign, and still the votes to the Liberals fell. Sunak called the election early because he could see what was happening with reform. He could see, because they're very close to reform, he could see how quickly reform were getting its act together. Give them another 3 or 4 months. They might have had some genuine candidates in seats rather than fake ones. They'd have got the social media worked out far better. They could have taken 30, 40, 50, 60 constituencies, backed by hedge funds and money in the city of London. It was scary. What's happened over the summer and the election is frightening if you're involved, which is why you don't see the celebrations of the biggest Labour majority for years. My predictions of what will happen, I think it's a question of 12 months to 18 months before child benefit is restored. Children in Scotland do not go cold and hungry because the Labour Party and the SNP have an agreement in Scotland and money is given to children, the poorest 2 out of 7 children in Scotland. All the things that Rachel Reeves says are not possible are already happening within the United Kingdom. Why does Rachel Reeves say it's not possible? Because she has dinner with people who tell her it's not possible. And she believes them. I partly blame St John's College, Oxford, by the way, but who taught her. St John's has so much to... Tony Blair as well. And what's the last thing I'll say? I'll spare a thought for Rishi Sunak, in a way. I know you might find it hard, but I think it'll be interesting when we look back at the period. Rishi Sunak could have done some pretty horrible things, populist to try to win. He didn't. The anecdote I find most interesting about Rishi is he's the only leader of a political party, or at least prime minister, who generally did actually support the football team, Southampton. It was said he was supposed to support. And can you imagine, you're actually a real football fan, and you end up being the one they say, oh no, he's just pretending he supported Southampton for votes, whereas all the others are making it up. It's a weird country, a weird state of politics. I'm hoping it's turning around. I hope those hundreds of Labour MPs who are going to their constituencies on Fridays, at least half of them have a soul, they will come back and they will tell their colleagues what is happening, the ministers who are too important to talk to their constituents. I think there will be public arguments. I think there's going to be a lot of distress, a lot of anger about things like winter fuel payments, VAT on schools, and we're going to go further and further into things we have to do because we have to do them. And what you're going to get will actually be far more radical than Jeremy Corbyn promised in 2017 and 2019, because it turns out there isn't actually any alternative. Thank you for letting me waffle on.
Danny, come sit down. Now, Danny, it's very interesting that you glossed over my fellow Guyanese, Wahid Ali. As a fellow Labour Party member, I think that's disgusting. I really do. I think, Starmer accepted what he did, and all of the campaign, 6 of them went to Taylor Swift. Starmer got his glasses from Wahid Ali. Isn't that deplorable?
The corruption. It's a desperate situation to go into measure degrees of corruption. So one of the claims is there's been no corruption scandal on a scale to what we're used to. Yet, or not out. How do you get to this stage? So and I've never met Keir Starmer. But let me imagine that I grew up in Surrey. My parents get me a bursary to go to a private school or wherever it is he went.
He went to grammar school.
It's grammar school, okay. Which became private. And there's Fatboy Slim, Norman, next to me. Quite an exclusive school.
Andrew Sullivan.
Yep. So, and Surrey is hardly, it's not quite the ghetto of Britain. So you're not going to learn very much about the country as a whole growing up there. Then you get into, and you've got a large field, and Rodney is a director of a company, but it does say toolmaker as his occupation, company director and toolmaker. Not doing badly. Go to Leeds, do law, no missing years, those who've read his biography.
Works very hard, gets it first.
Does very well. Oh, well, so yeah, only could get to Leeds because the government were going to pay the grant. Mysteriously manages to get to Teddy Hall somehow. Anyway, comes to Oxford, does that. Then goes into the CPS, and it's a sheltered life.
Human rights one.
He does do human rights. It's a good. He's not a fake, but I'm trying to work out how on earth do you get to a position of thinking, I need somebody to buy me some good clothes, and my partner some good clothes because it's going to make all the difference. Now, you could say he may not have gone through what I went through. I must be about his age, of realizing I'm never going to look good. Right? I know this. I'm never going to look not scruffy. There's absolutely no point buying me an Armani suit. It'll look terrible. Maybe Keir thinks, this is going to help my charisma problem. But it's like sticking your foot in it. It's amateur.
But Danny is a lawyer. He knows right and wrong.
Well, you could question some of the decisions made, but he was head of the CPS, so you have to make those decisions. Charles Mendes was.
Don't you think it comes down to the point that he's just a third-rate politician?
Well, when Labour have done well in the past, take Wilson, you've had a cabinet of strong people. It hasn't relied on a single great leader. The single great leader, you go back to the 30s, tends to go wrong with Labour, or Blair tends to go wrong. So you don't necessarily need a great politician as Prime Minister.
I was going to further say it comes down to, I think, the whole government is third-rate.
Let him speak, please.
There are very few.
Yeah. I'll repeat what you said so they can hear. So the question is whether the whole government are third-rate. Not necessarily. You take somebody like Yvette Cooper, Home Secretary. She has got experience, I'd say more capable than the average cabinet minister over the last 30 or 40 years.
Journalist.
Yep. And I don't even know her college, sorry. They all went to Oxford. She went out with Ed Balls and Ed Miliband, I'm here. I don't necessarily think that is the problem. I think the purging of anybody and the down rating of people who might have a different voice to say in cabinet has a really bad effect. If you don't have people sitting around, and it includes any organisation, could say my own university, if you look at bad decisions that have been made, you look at who made the decisions, often there wasn't a single dissenting voice in the room. And I think that's part of the problem. You've got to remember, these characters have been in a civil war. Votes of no confidence against their leader, backing another leader, huge numbers of rumours, are you in or are you out, quietly talking to each other, conspiracies. That's a terrible, terrible backdrop to setting up a government. That lying publicly to people, doing 10 pledges you don't mean to keep, and others have to be complicit in those lies, and also have to publicly denounce in some Stalinist way the previous regime enough to get brownie points to be allowed up. And you see those public announcements at book festivals, and I sometimes will it take 90 seconds for a particular MP to say how much she hates Jeremy Corbyn? And that's a terrible atmosphere to have. Now they're over their 100 days. Hopefully they are over that, or they'll begin to forget that. But at the same time as all that was happening, of all European political leaders, he no longer is one. Who is the person standing addressing the largest rallies occurring in Europe about the most important issue of our time? It is Jeremy Corbyn. Who is it who is actually flown by the South Africans to The Hague for the most important legal case in Europe at the moment? It's the demonised Jeremy Corbyn. So a very, very split party.
Let's talk about the right-wing press, which has been hyena-like since the election. Yeah. They're like Japanese prisoners of war. Remember the Japanese prisoner of war who was in the jungle for 27 years? Came out to realise the war had finished. Yeah. They have actually, from day one, they have been hyenas.
Well, they've got to sell papers. I've written a book called Seven Children, which I've said lots about. I've written another one at the same time, published a week later, called Peak Injustice, which we've publicised far less, because the first chapter is called Did You Not See Me?, which were the words used by the bike cyclist that Keir Starmer hit in London a couple of years ago while doing a U-turn on the way to somewhere. There are so many things that the press could go for that they haven't yet gone for. So they've just gone for the really obvious ones they have to. You have to go for some of these scandals because they're too easy. I think if and when they decide to attack the leadership of the Labour Party, they'll be able to find just everyday things. How many of you seen a picture of Keir at Leeds as a student? Him and his friends and the skull and looking more like somebody from the young ones than I ever did. And I was so annoying as a student. I grew up here, leather jacket, grew up in Oxford, a little bit in Cowley, but really Risinghurst. Turned up at Newcastle, which I then called Newcastle, walk into a Labour club, everybody put their beer down. And so I had to leave the Labour Party at 18. Right? I wasn't as annoying as Keir obviously was at Leeds. Right, with that. Now, they could pick up the stories, they can talk to his friends, they can talk to the people in the squat in London. You could pull apart the personal lives of these people, and the danger is they will at some point. They haven't yet gone for the jugular because the right-wing press don't have an alternative yet. They have a Conservative Party utterly divided with those two people currently going for leadership. My money's on Kemi. Ever since Michael Gove introduced me to her decades ago and said she'll lead the party. He's behind that. But they're toying with reform.
But every day in the Daily Telegraph, there are two stories about how dreadful Keir is, and two about how dreadful the BBC is.
Yeah, but that's why you buy the Telegraph. Well, it's literally what you buy it for. You know, you'd be upset if you didn't get that. And hopefully a story about how terrible universities are for letting in children from comprehensives, how terribly expensive it is to send your child to education, and then something about where in Tuscany you should go this summer.
Aren't you happy there's a Labour majority point in 12?
Yes, but for numerous reasons, partly because there will be so many MPs who can't be in the actual government. But the problem is that it's only 412 because reform put people up everywhere. It's 412 on fewer votes. Although that's a good thing because it means they can't be complacent. Right? They really do know they can be completely wiped out in 4 years and whatever, 8 months. Yeah.
Sorry, what did you say?
Where to make them be more conservative? At the moment, yeah, those at the top want to be more conservative. I mean, to be allowed in, you had to do that, and West Streeting is the epitome of that. That's at the moment, but the being more conservative thing didn't win them more votes. The biggest ever rise in the Labour vote in a short number of years was 2017. It towers over 1935 to 1945. 2017 showed what's possible when you don't organise it. Those youngsters from Momentum who went to seats and knocked on, turns out that has an effect. Having an honest manifesto, not smoothed, leaked early, where you actually say what you're going to do, has an effect, and a country that's sick of it.
What does change mean to you? That was the slogan on which the election was won.
What does change mean? I think there already are large changes. Most of the pay deals at the moment are progressive. The lower you're paid, the higher percentage you get. The higher you're paid in an organisation, the less you get. We are increasing benefits and state pensions still by inflation more than by wages. We're having a coming together. Non-dom status, I think, is going. I'm never quite sure. They keep waffling on one way or the other, but non-dom status looks pretty sure to go. 40 billion raising, if she does it. If she does it, that's change. If she introduces a small wealth tax, that's change. The VAT on schools isn't much different from what Blair did, which was no more assisted places after 1997. But I suspect it's just the beginning. So when people complain to me about Labour doing VAT on schools, I think, you need to think what they're going to do next. You know, that's just where you start. Because when you have 200 schools where there are buildings that children cannot go into because the roofs are too dangerous, in a country of more school buildings per head than any other in Europe, because we have so many schools, because we're so divided. Most schools in this city are private. only 30% of 15-year-olds go into them. 70% of 15-year-olds are going into the cramped schools in this city.
What are your hopes and fears on October 31st when Salvation Army background Rachel Reeves gets up?
I think I've watched her changing her tune over the weeks. My fears are that she believes too much the mantra of what we are allowed to do, that the mantra inside the Office of Budget Responsibility, inside the Treasury. She is very closely connected to the Treasury, don't you know? I don't. It's very. You could say yes. Yeah. So if your social life is with the same bunch of people who believe the same kind of things, I don't think we can borrow our way out of this, by the way, because our interest rates are already high and the world is wary of the position we're in. That's why trusts went down. We haven't had a run on the pound for a long time, but we no longer make steel. Right? This is a precarious small country. So I don't think she can borrow her way out of it. She's going to have to raise it with taxes. And if she wants to keep to the no increase on taxes on working people, very widely defined, to include those of us who are pretty well off, she has to go for national insurance contributions by the employer. They're looking for everything that could keep her in the manifesto. Capital gains tax, inheritance tax. I think I would be extremely happy, and maybe my bar is too low, but I've lived in this country for so many years. Slight indications of a change in trend towards beginning to look at that. Reduction on tax benefits on ISAs. Reducing the perks of my pension. As long as they reduce the perks of everybody else's pension who gets the same kind of pension I'm going to get, I'm happy. Right? Which may sound mad, but I don't like going on cruise holidays. Right? To do that. If I see the beginning of that, I'm happy. I wish they could be bolder. I wish they could outline the situation we're in and say, what we're doing will take us 20 to 30 years to get out of it. We could do it a bit faster if you're willing to sacrifice. And the willingness is you vote for us again. And we are going to do a large redistribution from wealth towards children, which is what the choice made in Scotland. Our poorest people in this country are children. And you can see how you can sell it. I mean, people do like children, or say they do, just when they vote.
You in the past have talked about the UK being a failure.
Yeah. Oh, the failure is...
Do you think it's going to carry on failing?
It's almost inconceivable to believe we're going to carry on failing at the rate we're failing. So in that 7 children book, I've got one graph, I've got 11 graphs to be exact. One of the United Nations assessment of the changes in poverty in all the countries that they study for children. In 2/3 of all countries, we've had huge reductions or small reductions in poverty. 1/5 of poverty going in Romania, and incredible things. Only a few countries have had rises in child poverty. Most of them are places like Iceland, which do pretty well, and it's tiny. And in Iceland, of course, that'd be 20 children, because it's not big. Only one country stands out, and that's the UK. Twice the rise of poverty of any other, already one of the worst. We're the only country that we know in Europe where the heights of children are falling because of, on average, all our children. And it's not because we're letting short children in. The country that let short children in was Germany. Half of the 1.5 million Syrians were children. They were slightly shorter. German heights dipped ever so slightly. Ours are doing this. I can go through it. It's so bad that it looks temporary. To give you one idea of when you can tell a statistic is temporary. 15, 20 years ago, life expectancy was going up in Kensington and Chelsea by more than a year each year. When we calculated life expectancy, it was rising by more than a year. Now, you knew that was really interesting because it couldn't carry on. The only way it can carry on is if it becomes Mount Olympus and they become gods in Kensington and Chelsea. So what it tells you when you get these really extreme fast changes is that that's probably going to come to an end. But it's not a good reason to sort of celebrate. We've done so unbelievably terribly in the last few years that the next few won't look as bad. But it's a rich country. We could sort a lot of these things out relatively easily. The low-hanging fruit, rent regulation. Landlords are not going to bulldoze their property if you don't let them put up the rents.
Short questions. Remember my thing about if you make a statement, we'll send you off to the police station. The gentleman at the back with his hand up. Now stand up, please.
I'd like to know your perspective on how they've got their communication strategy so wrong in these first few 100 days, given they had so much time to prepare some decent people in the right positions.
How did they get the communication strategy? Well, don't forget that it was only 4 or 5 weeks before the election that Sky did a poll which suggested they may not have won. So they were not, it sounds ridiculous now, but they were not sure of winning. Labour lived in fear of not winning elections. So all the communications were on winning the election, not on what we're going to do when we win. It's about winning. And then I'd say it's that continuing purging and arguing. Hence what happened with Sue Gray. If you imagine what have been going on in those two offices, it's number 10, 11 and 12. I think I've been in them. They're all knocked through. 12's the media one with all the TV screens. It's a hot house work environment. We now know from Sue Gray going and all the leaks about salaries, £5 more than the PM, just the nastiness inside there. And it's the same nastiness that a few months earlier was directed at people more on the left of the party. They've got rid of the left, so now it's kind of like eating themselves.
So Danny, she was in charge of communications. She did the Daily Grid.
Yeah.
She has no journalistic experience. She talked in derogatory terms about journalists. Yeah. She's the wrong woman for the job.
They're very good at, well, I think, I can always have opinion. If you were to assess who was the right person to do the job, you'd go back, I think, and look at when you didn't know who the press secretary was. The famous one was Maggie's, but I don't know whether Bernard Ingham, but I think he did his own PR to create his own story about how wonderful he was. The Tories did terribly. That ex-BBC presenter was hung out to dry over that one comment in the press room about parties, if you remember. There were lots of... There is a tradition of making a mess of dealing with the lobby and doing media in number 10.
They did it appallingly. The first 100 days have been appalling.
They have not been feeding the press, but they're about winning elections. And you forget that the first 100 days really don't matter one iota for winning the next election. The number of scandals you can have, and you forget what the scandals were in years. Do you remember when, and you're now used to the idea that people might have parties during the pandemic. Right? The question is just how big a party was it? I'm always shocked by comparisons with other countries, of which my favourite is Finland. The minister has to do the tiniest mistake, not something corrupt, just not be efficient. And then they write a letter resigning and apologising for it. We have such a low bar.
Hang on a minute. The Americans talk about campaigning in poetry, coming in prose.
Yes.
Let's not have done it the wrong way around.
It's a mess, but you look at Trump and the current vice president. She's really interesting over a very, very well produced story. She may not win, but that's an exercise in writing your life story and it looking good. So the Americans can look slicker quite often than we do. It's also, I think, hard if the press are not on your side to control the narrative, because this is a small island.
Gary Brown. Stand up, Gary, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for that. Very good to get a considered view of what's happening. Thank you. One of the two things, though, which I might put together, you seem to be saying they're a bit cautious. You'd like it to be a bit more radical. Yeah. But you think the 100 days can be overrated, and let's see what happens. But it seems to me that they are relying on growth to do most of their work in kind of social work or being created a fairer society and new
Yeah.
values. But they don't seem to be bringing much to the table to generate growth, other than, as you were saying, smoothing capitalism or
Yeah.
deregulating.
Yeah.
And that, if we are going to change in a radical direction, the first 100 days in changing the agenda, the way we think about things is important. You know, skills, further education, higher education, I don't hear much about them. And so and
Yeah.
you could say, although New Labour did pretty well in many ways domestically, it did it by stealth and didn't change the framework of ideology which people.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, the best things that the new Labour government did, they did secretly, putting double glazing in social housing across the country, but they were embarrassed about doing it. The things that they're proud of, when you measure them, they took 1 million children just over a poverty line. So it was really easy to slip back.
This is Blair's government.
The growth mantra is the mantra you have to say to be treated as seriously as an adult in the room. I don't agree with it, by the way. I don't think it's a question, and I don't think we can get it anyway, even if you think it might be desirable in the situation we're currently in. Casino banking, gambling, higher education, external students are our free growth areas. I'd concentrate on making universities places where you actually get a good deal as somebody from Malaysia for 3 years if you come here, because it matters. I'm not sure to what extent the growth talk, and it was in Starmer's speeches in the summer, very similar to George Osborne, very similar to Boris Johnson's resignation speech, I will make us the highest growth country of the G7. I don't know to what extent he believed that or understood that, and to what extent it was said so it didn't look that different from the Conservatives to win. Tawney 100 years ago complained about politicians on the left talking endlessly about productivity and growth, ironically. So we've kind of been here before. FE, the last thing I mentioned about changes, why I'm not necessarily pessimistic. I keep worrying I've got this wrong, but I think I'm correct. About a year before the election, a letter was sent to the head of all further education colleges, including our one here, informing them that the Office of National Statistics, as of that day, had reclassified further education in this country as part of the state sector, not private on the national accounts. This was ONS. And from now on, they must consider themselves part of the Department for Education and cannot raise any money or a loan without the Secretary of State's permission. Now, what that letter didn't say, and what we never say, is, oh, by the way, you can't pay yourself more than the Secretary of State, given you're part of my department. The Conservatives nationalised the whole of FE, almost silently. So the kind of thing that's possible, only because it was in such a mess that it had to be. You know, we're only nationalising the trains because we couldn't even create a piss-poor privatised system. So we have to. But I'm not pessimistic, but we're not going to get out of a tired, ill country some sudden productivity miracle. And you're not going to be getting it by injecting people for something that stops them getting fat, and all which we've had today. And you've got to stop going on about the BMI of children. And remember, for your body mass index, you need 2 measurements, weight and height. The English government don't publish the heights. The Scottish government do. Scottish children are slowly getting taller. The Scottish government looks after Scottish children. English children are slowly getting shorter. Some really basic things that are actually items of emergency. So you could say, we are in a national emergency. They said this was cost of living in Scotland, and we are going to enact a number of things to do with transferring wealth from people who have too much to those who have none, while we're in an emergency, which you could actually honestly claim is an emergency. I don't think they've got the guts or the knowledge to do that, because in the parts of London they live in, or the parts of Oxford they come to study in, they don't see it. But that's my hope about the MPs, because the one thing you get to see as an MP is some of the worst problems that your constituents face. If you go, if you attend.
No surprise. Gentleman with the hand up there, stand up from the mic, please.
Yes, is it not a fundamental problem here that Starmer doesn't have a worldview? I mean, could you really say what Starmerism is? Is there such a thing as Starmerism? This is in contrast really to Tony Blair, who, the Federal Voice did have a worldview, globalisation, public-private partnerships, policy instruments. They had think tanks, they had gurus. So it seems like a vacuum of ideas really with Starmer and this Labour government, and that's a big cause for concern, I think.
Yeah.
The question was, what is Starmerism? Does Starmer have a worldview?
Yeah. So it turns out, I mean, Tony Blair definitely had a worldview, and we weren't aware of it. It began with tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime, education, but then sitting down and praying with George Bush and taking us to war. But he certainly had a view, almost messianic view. God told him what to do and he did it, or Murdoch. Starmer appears to be very different. A bit like the head of an Oxford college, but we're here. The head of an Oxford college always wants to be the head of something and finally becomes the head of an Oxford college and doesn't actually know what they want to do. And suddenly doesn't want to do the 12-hour day and the monotony that's involved. I have never met him. I don't know what it is that drives, but he's already been the head of the CPS and kind of been rewarded for that. A number of years, not too many criticisms, well done, you're a good manager. So maybe he wanted that feeling again. I don't know, but you've got to remember the chaos this came out of. He was a loyal shadow cabinet minister to Jeremy Corbyn, more loyal than the others publicly. His big thing was legality in Europe and quite articulate, if long, speeches about law in Europe. He slipped through in the leadership race on the grounds that he was the continuity candidate and the woman who was most like Corbyn wouldn't take her sunglasses off when giving speeches, which, there wasn't really much of an option. And Lisa Nandy was the third, I think. It was an odd, and he ends up there. And that's how things now happen on our small island. But it's never great leaders. We don't have kind of Kennedys. Or our great leaders like Churchill, when you look into them, turn out not to have been necessarily such, superhero characters. I like John Major as a Prime Minister in some ways. And he certainly was maligned and you wouldn't, but not necessarily given what had happened before Major. Inequality actually fell under John Major. Don't think he meant it to, but, they don't have. Attlee was a bumbling, posh man who couldn't give a decent public speech. But he was our Prime Minister in 1945. He cared about his constituents, but you wouldn't say, look at Attlee and his oratory and his ability to command the House or anything.
Lady in row 3, if you don't mind standing up.
I have to stand, but I'm not standing up in case I can't see this. So I'm from Newcastle. I've never been in Oxford until 2 days ago, and I had to Google it to find out where it was. So perhaps I have a different perspective than what I can share with you. But I do wonder about all those new MPs who didn't expect to be there. There was going to be a very large number of MPs who are not front bench and don't have a role. And some of the ones that I know come from real life and real jobs with real experience. And I do wonder about, as a Labour Party member, about the pressures that they'll be seeing, particularly in the North East, 1 in 3 children living with child poverty, and some parts of the North East, 9 out of 10, and some constituencies in child poverty, very different to here. I just wonder about how those experiences are going to play within what is a smaller, tighter Labour Party. And no one's mentioned Angela Rayner. Doesn't she feel lost?
No.
In what Blair did, as you well know, with his MPs, he had the majority sent them out to their constituencies all the time, so they won't cause them trouble in the parliament.
No, I mean, Angela's stuck in there. She can stuck in there because she's voted for, so she's very hard to get rid of her, but she's tough. She's withstood one really nasty press intrusion on her private life. That's what it was, not an expensive scandal. And she's really tough. She's a grandmother. She was born in 1983, I can remember. She's ridiculously young. And there were others. There are MPs up in the northeast who have been serving for a long time, who do know what they're doing, not necessarily the nicest people, but you're right, these new ones. And that's part of my hope. But if you remember 1997, a lot of the women who got elected had been put into constituencies where it wasn't thought they were going to win, and suddenly you get the 100. And it was a shock. A lot of them didn't stand again, and it was a shock. But it's partly my hope. On poverty, you're right, the northeast is by far the worst in England, but we are in the southeast region, which doesn't include London, which has the biggest number of poor children. The southeast of England, we now have a higher child poverty rate than Scotland. Now, I grew up here in the 70s and 80s. And in the 70s and 80s, Scotland and Glasgow was the poorest part of Europe. They're comparing it to Rostock. So things can really change. Just to go on about, over Labour doing good things in the past, devolution for Scotland and Wales, but devolution for Scotland in 1997 may have been one of the most successful social policies. You don't have to worry about whether it's the SNP or not. Simply letting people in a country determine a large amount of their own lives has been shown to be successful. But the problem is we don't celebrate it because of that strange party that actually happened to be in power when the changes happened. And the contrast between a child in Newcastle or up in Blythe and a child just north of the border in Scotland and their lives is shocking over the differences in what they can go to university for free, and they need not go cold or hungry in their childhood north of that border.
Jeff had a question. Stand up if you don't mind.
My knowledge is a bit limited. When we talked about the wealth fund, we've got MPs who are hopeful that will be elected. Rather than going the rules of capitalism, is there any way of investing in our children? This is terrifying.
Yeah.
Anybody going on the board, surely there will need to be invested. That's the future.
Yeah. And it's relatively cheap. The fact they managed to afford it is remarkably cheap to give child benefit for the third and very occasionally fourth child. There are very few families of four now. Simply reducing the tax perks for higher paid university professors and hospital consultants in Scotland balanced out what's needed, because you're talking £20 a week, what you need. Improving the school meals is about £1 extra a week for far better nutritious food, so that your children go up, not down. And they could lead on this. They could say this is what we are doing and why we are doing it, and they could say we're going to keep means testing the winter fuel payments. We don't want to, but we're making a choice between the children and the old. And they could do that. By the way, the winter fuel payments, my father had a conspiracy theory, which I he's still around, I'll share because I'm seeing him tomorrow. Because of course he got it. He's now 82, retired doctor. He had a suspicion that the winter fuel payments came so that people like him would think, well, if I'm getting this and my bus pass and all these other things, the government are clearly looking after people in need, and all this stuff about them being nasty can't be true. We shouldn't have a situation where people need winter fuel payments. They don't have winter fuel payments in Iceland or Sweden or Norway or Finland or Denmark. And the winter is much colder there. Right?
But it saved peanuts, 1.5 billion.
Yeah.
Was it doing? Yes, yes, this lady here. Don't mind standing up again.
But in Norway and Sweden and Finland, they pay higher taxes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what is wrong with this country? The minute someone talks about raising taxes, everyone shoots up in the air.
Yeah.
It's insane. We can't have good services without people paying taxes.
Yeah.
I mean, that's ABC.
Yeah, we've become more and more American into thinking of tax as theft. And we have the highest taxes for 70 years, but they're lower than every other European country other than Switzerland and Ireland. And that's because they have fake GDPs. France, Belgium, Finland, Norway are taxing 20% more than us. We take about 37% of everything. They're much higher. Well, 2 or 3 national health services. And in Finland, when you poll people, they say they like paying tax, but they know what it's getting them, which is a good score for every school. Social housing on their equivalent of Canary Wharf. Council flats for every university student, with a cooker and an oven and a kitchen and a double bed with a curtain around it. Almost no rent for going that. Social housing in Helsinki for retired rock stars, with soundproof practicing rooms if you want to bash the drums at age 75. No homeless people on the streets. It's stunning what is possible. But look at Germany, which is what the 2017 and 2019 Labour manifestos were basically aiming at, to increase our public spending to the level of Germany, which is $1 billion more a week on health than we spend, and an education system where you go to the local state school in general. This is Germany. This is not France, which is even more radical. But we've been educated by our press, but also our politicians, and partly to blame my university teaching PPE in a particular way, and teaching the same awful version of 1980s A-level economics, which is just wrong, endlessly, to make people believe, and particularly the elite believe, that it is more efficient to use the market. I've had a BBC one-on-one correspondent tell me, Radio 4, I cannot say that the market might not be efficient. If I say the market is not always efficient, I may not keep my post. It's an unwritten rule. The market should be in everything unless you absolutely can't afford it. And that does come from what we've taught in our universities, which comes from the United States of America.
Lady in row 4.
My question is in relation to this, because I'm very concerned about the level of political awareness, and I'm sure those of us who've been canvassing will be, well, I've been horrified when I've been met with just total knowledge of information. So I'm not just talking about on the streets, every single level of society. I think it's pretty abysmal.
Yeah, about level of political awareness. You can measure these things in different countries, and to what extent people understand how the government or parliament work. And we do score lowly. It's partly reflected through abstention, how many people don't vote. So you sometimes don't vote because you just don't want to vote. Sometimes you don't understand it. Vote might matter. The US is worse for how many people don't vote, and level of political awareness is lower, I think, in the US than here. We're supposed to teach it in our schools. It was Bernard, I forgot the professor of politics at Sheffield. Crick. Was it David's dad? Was it the dad of Michael? Yeah.
No, a relative.
Okay, relative of Michael Crick. We are supposed to teach citizenship in our schools, but we have so exhausted our school teachers by having a national curriculum they have to deliver that they can do nothing innovative in the schools, and they're just doing the minimum that they have to have. I do school talks. I'm in Stoke tomorrow doing a school talk. I love doing school talks. I can very easily get into private schools, which I go to. But getting into a state school, 93% of our children, you can see the tired teachers going, how on earth are we going to give you 45 minutes, Danny, to do that? So that we've run things down to a level, and it's a complexity of it. You know, how do you explain what the House of Lords is? How do you explain that we don't have a constitution, except we sort of do, but you can't see it? How do you explain first past the post and why it might not be necessarily good? How do you explain that we've had a member of parliament in this city since 1370 and they've never come from Oxford? We've had some university students, nice people, Andrew Smith, St John's again, Annalise, St John's again, so in one college. But how do you explain to people you can have a city of Oxford and a member of some kind of parliament since 1370, but nobody actually from Oxford has ever been allowed to represent the people of Oxford? You know, and then you get cynicism and conspiracy. And one of the fascinating things is to compare the degree to which people believe conspiracy theories in different countries. One thing we're really good at, by the way, we have the lowest belief that the climate change is a hoax in the whole world. And that's an effect of the BBC and unity between the political parties. So it is possible, even in a country with relatively poor education and knowledge, certainly lowest on science scores in Europe when we test them, because we teach to the test. So we teach people how to get an A. When you ask them questions 4 years later, they can't answer them. But to be optimistic, we are the least climate skeptic people in the whole planet. And that is the BBC and journalists making a decision to go one particular way.
Two more questions. Lady right at the back. Yes, that's you. Stand up, please, and shout.
Yes. What do I think about the rest of the world now? Did we tax people, they'll leave? There's been a useful number of studies on this, because of course the Nordic countries tax people quite highly, and they've studied the extent to which they go. The rich tend to be pretty sticky, so they tend not to go. They threaten to go. They're very, very loud, and they're ever so opinionated, and they're sure they're right, but they tend not to go. We suspect they're particularly sticky in London, but all kind of reasons why you might want to be here. There are some people who want to go and spend 6 months of their life living on a tiny island called Jersey because they so hate paying tax. But no, we increase taxes on them, they largely won't go. Other people will come because it's a relatively safe haven, looks after property. But my bottom line on this is those rich people who will go if we tax their wealth more, I don't want them here. I really don't want them here. I pity the place they go to. And I think we should say that. I think we should say, if you're the kind of person who's going to leave because we're going to take some of the money that you're going to buy a Caribbean island with and use it to fund incubators in hospitals and to fix the roofs in schools, and if you so object to that, please go. And please don't own a newspaper here anymore. And please don't fund Nigel Farage. And please don't spread your vile hatred and nastiness. But please go somewhere where you're not going to cause harm. Belize.
One last question. That gentleman has been patient.
This might be a statement, so I don't know whether it is. Following on from your comment about tax, I think the key thing with tax is sure that they are their
Share.
contribution, and the rich are paying far less as a percentage of their wealth than the majority of people, and that needs to be sorted. But my question, bringing it back quickly, is a little bit cheeky, perhaps. Can we trust this Labour government to be social democratic, to be redistributive, say that word, when they are currently getting into bed with Macquarie, Blackstone, and paying payments off the book for buying new homes?
Yeah.
We trust the Labour government.
Can we trust? And currently, a higher tax rate is paid by poorer people than the rich, and our VAT is incredibly high. Can we trust them? Well, bless her, Louise Haigh, Sheffield MP. I go for future PM, by the way, for Louise Haigh. Conflict of interest, me and Louise Haigh are both patrons of Healy City Farm in Sheffield. Louise stood up and said that P&O is wrong, and then Starmer tried to slap her down, but he's not very good at slapping. So I don't want to be cruel. There's always a temptation to take the aristocratic embrace. There's always a temptation, particularly if you haven't come from money or it's new and you don't know it, to take the money, to buy those flats in Bristol, and then some more houses and some more houses. Before you know it, you own 100 houses. And to help your son set up an education company that's worth 100 million. And this, I'm being careful over, he's not going to sue me, but in the university I work, it's called the Aristocratic Embrace. Welcome in. You're now a trustee of this college. You own it. Would you like to eat for free every night? And breakfast and lunch? And here's a housing allowance, and here's some nice wine, and here's a Bupa membership. Oh, but don't worry, you're still an academic. Would you like an MBE or CBE? Would you like to be Sir? And would you like a small country estate, or at least something so that your children are protected? It's not greedy. I'm running the country on £170,000 a year, when the CEOs get 4 million, and you criticise the fact I let somebody buy my coat. You can see we saw it occur with the Blair government and certain ministers. Some of them maybe, but if you want to become rich, there are honestly easier and better ways than going into politics to do it. But it's going to take the types like Louise Haigh from Sheffield to fight the battle inside the cabinet, which is cabinet member, and keep them straight. And that's where the hope lies. She's the nearest to Barbara Castle, by the way, we currently have. But and Diane Abbott is still there, and she's mother of the house. Jeremy Corbyn, by the way, would have been father of the house, but for the fact that one Tory did his maiden speech an hour earlier. So we had an amazing hour on the day after the election, where it looked as if Jeremy Corbyn and Diane Abbott, as the longest-serving female MPs, were going to be the mother and father of the house. There's always a chance of your state becoming utterly corrupt. And there are other places where this has happened. And we're in a position where it is possible, and we do not have a press investigating them, to ask how many homes and holiday homes they have and what are they doing. And we have a precedent in New Labour, not just Blair, but some other ministers who enriched themselves incredibly. But we need to just be aware of it and publicly talk about it, and don't be so civil that we don't mention the danger of this kind of corruption. If I receive a gift worth £50, I have to declare it as part of my job. Right. That's just normal.
Give us 60 seconds of hope. 60 seconds of hope.
60 seconds of hope to end on. I am hopeful because Labour didn't have to win. Through an amazing set of circumstances, ego and so on, Reform rose just to the right height to completely destroy the Conservative Party, possibly forever. No party lasts forever. We have 2 Labour MPs representing the 2 constituencies where most of the small boats land. Think about that. where the small boats land, more people have voted Labour than for any other party, despite the attempts to terrify people about small boats. Our youngsters, if you look at what they believe in and how they vote, know they've been ripped off. They know we haven't built the homes that they should be living in. They know we've been greedy. They know we've taken the money that should have been shared with them. They know that enough of us have second homes and third homes and holiday homes and so on, that it isn't that they haven't been productive enough. They know they've got enormous student debts. For the 65% who go to university by age 30, 65%, yeah, I wouldn't have put it as high, but we brought in the market. And that's how we got 65% going to university. I think things are going to get better. I think we're at a high point of inequality. That was 2018. The income gaps have been narrowing since then. The wealth gaps have narrowed because that inflation ate into the wealth. House prices have not gone up as much as wages. Nobody talks about the house price falls, but we've had real house price falls. People are getting out of buy-to-let if they can, because they can see the writing on the wall over you're not going to be allowed to behave like this. And if you think I'm being a bit unfair to landlords, almost 1 in 3 of our children is now living in a private rented property, meaning that they can be given 2 months' notice of eviction and have to lose all their friends and go to another school if that is done to them. Now, the fact that we did that, it's going to change. I would celebrate the things that get better over the next few years. I wouldn't be completely cynical. I'd criticise but not be cynical. And the last reason for hope, the incredible discipline of the left wing of the Labour Party, who kept absolutely quiet month after month after month as we're approaching an election. You know, really well behaved. Not saying he's not a particularly nice man about Keir Starmer, because there was something more important going on, and there was a worse possible outcome, much worse than what we got. And it actually shocked me, and that's my side of the Labour Party. Right? The incredibly good behaviour and kindness shown by a set of people who'd had their friends purged from a party, really bad behaviour, but didn't act in the same way backwards. And that shows a degree and extent and possibility for human kindness. I don't think the Labour Party as it is a long-term project. It's simply too wide. But until we get PR, we can't have 2 parties. And so we're going to have to battle on in this way. Oh, and the last thing, I didn't quite say this as a Labour Party member. I did quite, how do I say it? This is a danger. I did quite like what happened in Bristol when I was there. West, if you know it. Things can change. Labour have to start talking to the Greens. It's ridiculous. It's utterly ridiculous. And if you've only got 4 years and 6-7 months to go, you need to start sorting out your alliances now, not as a last-minute thing when you see how badly you're doing in the polls, because people are still poor no matter what you've done. Hope isn't there. And we're going to be looking very bad on international rankings again and again and again.
Before you thank Danny profusely, a couple of commercials. You should all have a leaflet on your chair. 2 events in November. Please come to them. On Saturday, down the road in Mount Place, there's an Oktoberfest. There's beer, bands, and sausages. So please come to that. There's 2 or 3 events, and these tea towels are a wonderful memento of Jericho. £5 on your way up. Do buy one or buy a calendar. Would you thank Danny very much indeed?